After over 1,700 suicides, the Golden Gate Bridge is getting a protective barrier. Hi everyone, I'm Jeff, and welcome back to Plain English for this Thursday. JR is the producer, and he has posted the full transcript and all the episode resources at plainenglish.com/183. Coming up today, it's one of the most famous bridges in the world, the symbol of San Francisco, but it's also the symbol of something much darker for too many families. It's the place they lost a loved one to suicide, and that hopefully will change as a suicide barrier is being constructed to save people from jumping to their deaths. Later in this episode, we'll talk about the English phrase, in your prime, and JR has a song of the week for us. Before we start, I know a lot of you like using the translations we have on our website. They're really cool, and they work great on mobile devices. Actually, someone wrote me last week saying that it would be nice if the interactive translations worked on mobile phones. They do. They work great on your phone. When you get to a highlighted word on your phone, just tap on it and it shows you the translation. Anyway, if you use those, I'm asking you, please, please, please get on our email list because we're going to be changing things up a little bit, and I want to make sure that you know how to access them in the future. You can get on that list by going to plainenglish.com/mail. The Golden Gate Bridge, with its two towers, sweeping cables, and rust orange color, is one of the most famous bridges in the world. Millions of tourists visit every year. Many more use it to commute to their jobs in San Francisco from the Tony northern suburbs. Set against the hills of Marin County, the rocky shore, and the calm waters, it is one of the most beautiful bridges in the world. In its day, it was an engineering feat. Today, it's the symbol of one of America's greatest cities. It is also a magnet for suicides. Since it was constructed in 1937, over 1,700 people have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge to their deaths, falling 250 feet into the water below. A person who jumps off the bridge hits the water just seconds later at 75 miles per hour. The impact with the water is often fatal, but many people survive the impact with broken bones and internal bleeding. Many who survive the impact later drown. Just 5% of people who jump survive, and they often live with physical disabilities that last a long time. Last year, about 200 people took their own lives by jumping off the bridge. But a project is in the works to build a suicide barrier, a net that will extend from each side of the bridge. Project advocates hope that the barrier will greatly reduce, if not eliminate, suicides at the landmark bridge. The net will extend 20 feet from the side of the structure, and it will be constructed 20 feet below the surface, about the distance of a 2-story building. The material will be sturdy steel marine cable. A person who falls onto the barrier would suffer broken bones and bruises, but that person would live. The suicide barrier will bring to fruition an idea first proposed 70 years ago when advocates suggested putting barbed wire over the railing. Not everyone is in favor of erecting the barrier. Preservationists argue that the barrier would change the aesthetics of the iconic bridge. Others think it's not worth the $211 million project cost. That's 3 times the original cost of the entire bridge. And still others say the barrier wouldn't prevent suicides at all. People so inclined could easily take their lives another way. Each of these objections is appealing in its own way, but even taken together, they are unconvincing. Start with the aesthetics. Yes, the suicide barrier will alter the look of the bridge. Steel brackets to support the barrier will extend from the main bridge structure. These will be visible and painted the same rust orange as the rest of the steel bridge. The netting is gray and is expected to blend in with the fog. But the important thing to keep in mind is that, yes, the bridge is a work of art, but it's not a museum piece. It's a piece of functional art. Its job is not to be the background of an Instagram photo. Its job is to safely transport people from one side to the other. If it needs the barrier to do its job, then it should get the most beautiful suicide barrier possible, but it should get the barrier. Now for the $211 million project cost. An expenditure, critics say, is to save people who have already decided to take their own lives. Is that really worth it when there are so many other priorities for public money? Putting a dollar value on a life saved is always an uncomfortable proposition, but it's sometimes necessary. So let's try. If 200 people jump to their deaths each year, the project costs $1 million per person saved per year. If the barrier lasts 20 years, it costs $50,000 per life saved, or the cost of one luxury SUV. Many of the people who jump are young. Based on articles in the press, 3 recent victims were 17, 18, and 25 years old. If they had gotten the treatment they needed, they would have had a full lifetime to work, have families, contribute to society, and yes, pay taxes. It is awkward to talk about the value of saving a younger person's life versus an older person's life, but suicide is a special kind of tragedy that robs people before they hit their prime. But the life saved is only one of the benefits of preventing a suicide, especially at a landmark. You have to also consider the effect on bridge workers, who suffer the emotional toll of having to coax suicidal people from the edge of the bridge with tragic regularity. Patrol workers encounter a suicidal person several times a week. That should not be in anyone's job description. You should also consider the cost in public resources of rescuing and caring for people who survive, responding to emergency calls, and searching for the bodies of those who don't survive. This is all not to mention the emotional toll that a suicide takes on the surviving family members. For a parent, losing a child to suicide is the most painful kind of tragedy. Taking all of this into consideration, the $50,000 investment per life saved starts looking like a bargain, not an extravagance. But what about the most seductive counterargument? The idea that the barrier won't prevent suicides at all, but simply displace them. Wouldn't a person determined to take his own life, and they are mostly male, simply find another way to do it? The evidence strongly suggests that the majority would not. Suicide has its own bizarre logic. It is surprisingly impulsive. In general, people do not plan it for a long time. A study of young women who attempted suicide found that 60% had been seriously contemplating it for less than 2 hours before they attempted it. 10% had been thinking about it for less than a minute. Other studies show that 9/10 of failed suicide attempts do not lead to a second attempt. And what's more, people tend to fixate on a single means of death. If one method doesn't work, they don't typically try another. Almost all Golden Gate survivors say it was the bridge or nothing. One study followed 515 people who had attempted suicide at the Golden Gate Bridge, but who were restrained or stopped from jumping. 25 years later, 94% of those people were either still alive or had died from other causes. Only 6% went on to take their own lives. It is impossible to know in every case, but these facts strongly suggest that, in the vast majority of cases, a suicide impeded is a suicide prevented. The barrier is being assembled in a nearby town and gradually installed piece by piece via a special access path being built under the roadway. Lanes will be closed at night through 2021 when the barrier is expected to open. I met someone who was at the Golden Gate Bridge on the day it opened in 1937. It opened for pedestrians only that day, and it was flooded with people walking across, being part of that historic day. It really is an incredible bridge, and pretty soon it will be a safer one too. The phrase we're going to talk about today is in your prime. When you're in your prime, you're in the most vital, most energetic, most productive part of your life. The tragedy of suicides is that it takes people before they reach their prime. It is the second leading cause of death among Americans between ages 15 and 34. A disturbing number of adolescents under the age of 15 take their own lives. Any preventable death is a tragedy, but these are especially sad as they take people before they reach the prime of their lives, before they reach that great middle part of life where you can reach your potential, start a family, excel in your career, contribute to society, or be the happiest. When do you think is the prime of your life? It can be different for different people. Athletes tend to be in the prime of their lives earlier than the rest of us. A baseball player, for example, is in his prime between about age 26 and 29. It can be different for athletes of different sports. In athletic sports like figure skating, tennis, and gymnastics, your prime is earlier. In more skill-based sports like basketball or golf, you reach your prime later. For people in business, our prime comes even later than that. The way I see it, in your 20s, you don't know anything. In your 30s, that's where I am. You're ramping up, preparing. By your 40s and early 50s, usually you're in the prime of your working life. That's when you can make the greatest impact. You've got some good experience. You've learned a lot, and you're now ready to make your biggest strides in business and in your career. By your late 50s and 60s, you can definitely still contribute, but most people are past their prime and thinking about retirement. Evolution has its own opinion. Evolution cares about two things: survival and reproduction. From that perspective, people are in their prime between the ages of 18 and 35. 3 ways to use this word. You can say someone is in her prime if that person is in the most vital, energetic part of her life or career. Or you can say someone has hit his prime if that person has just arrived at his most productive time. Then you can say someone is past his prime if you want to say that his best days are behind him. That's sometimes not polite to say, unless it's kind of obvious, like in the case of an athlete. On the Yankees, CC Sabathia is going to retire after this year. He is well past his prime because he's 39 years old. That's old for a pro athlete. It's not insulting to say that he's past his prime if he's a 39-year-old pro athlete. Speaking of the Yankees, the Colombian Gio Urshela is hitting the tar off the ball. He's 27, and he's hitting his prime now. A little late for a baseball player, but he's still hitting his prime. The Venezuelan Gleyber Torres is 22. He's doing really well in his early career, but he still probably hasn't reached his prime yet. JR's song of the week today is Forever Young by Alphaville. It goes along well with the idea of being in the prime of your life. It's kind of an optimistic song that's usually associated with high school graduations and that part of your life when everything seems like it's in front of you. It was released in 1984 by a German band, but became much more popular in the US than in Germany itself, and it has been included in a lot of soundtracks. If you have any songs you'd like to nominate for future episodes, you can send them to jr@plainenglish.com. That's all for today. Thanks for sticking with us for this long episode. Remember, if you like those translations on the website, please sign up for our email list at plainenglish.com/mail, M-A-I-L. We will be sending out some news on the changes to the translations, and we want to make sure nothing happens to your access to those. And of course, you'll get JR's emails every Monday and Thursday with additional episode resources. plainenglish.com/mail, and we'll see you back here on Monday. If you enjoy listening to Plain English, then I'd like you to consider joining Plain English Plus. With video lessons, faster audio, flashcards, and online courses, it's the best way to take your English to the next level. Visit plainenglish.com/plus to read all about it.